Thank you everybody for your patience us getting started tonight. We're very excited to be having Abigail Lowe and Malaika Tolford here to talk about their current exhibition, Treasure and Tarnish, which opened, good Lord.
Oh, good grief.
2 weeks ago. Oh my goodness. No one knows what time it is in COVID. But there's tons of ways to enter this exhibition virtually or in person. Of course, we're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 6. But also we're gonna have a talk with Scott Olson. He is a PhD candidate and in anthropology and archaeology. And he's gonna sort of talk about how this work of Schliemann's has really affected the sort of nationalism movement that happened during World War II and other parts of the country. A really interesting way to look at the work that they're presenting today. And Malaika will be giving a presentation at the close of the show at the end of May. So please check our website always for those and sign up for our newsletter. I am really thrilled to have these two talk about their actual collaboration. Abby studied at Grinnell and got her master's, oh no, I'm so sorry, got her BA in visual and narrative identity. She came through, they both met at residency in 2018. 15, it seems so long ago. And this has just been such a wonderful way to see our residents interact and thrive off each other and collaborate through material, through idea, through imagery. Abby is currently an artist at large. She teaches with us and she does marketing. Malaika Tolford got her degree up in Chicago as an anthropologist and art history, and has been in St. Louis, I want to say 4 years. 10 years.
10 years. 10 years this May. Yep.
And actually, Malaika was part of our family way before the residency. She was teaching and in our studios. And then we're always thrilled when someone in our family applies to our residency and can really thrive. And she opened Value Place Pottery, Place Value Pottery, and has been part of our family, still teaching with us as well as Abby since then. They both bring an amazing sensibility to their work. I always talk about Abby as very theatrical. She's very into literature. She sees the storyline all the way through. And Malaika works really small, meticulous clay, really into digging under the earth and through the earth. Their residencies, you would walk into Malaika's studio and there was pictures of urns and things she had dug up in Greece. And Abby was into, giving Ophelia a voice. So it's so wonderful to see the marriage of these two sensibilities and these wonderful creative personalities come together. So thank you for that. I want you guys to know that we do have a live audience. There's only 10 of us here, but you will hear people coming and going. And if you don't hear us, because we're all masked, please throw stuff into the chats. We will do question and answer at the end. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Abby and Malaika.
We shall say hi. Okay. So we thought we'd let you see our faces for a second before we screen share our presentation. But yeah, I think other than putting your comments and questions in the chat, I don't think we have any notes for anything.
Yeah, no, you can. You don't have to save your comments and questions till the end. You can throw them in the chat, and then Stephanie and Bailey will go through them, and we can have a Q&A at the end. And I can't think of anything else.
Okay, well, we're going to share the screen. Here we go. One moment. All right, so the first thing that we wanted to do was give you guys each a background on each. Malaika and I, kind of a sense of our portfolios and our academic histories that kind of led us to this strange and wonderful subject of Heinrich Schliemann and this ransacking of Troy, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Yeah, so I really came to this subject via sort of narrative and literature, specifically through kind of the Homeric epics, I'd say was my main entry point into it. And Malaika more came from a historic anthropological research-based approach. And then we made a lot of work together. And it was such fun working together because we have a lot of admiration, I would say, and excitement about each other's materials.
And like Stephanie said, we met in 2018 during our residency together, and we learned a little bit about our background, but we really delved into getting to know each other more. But we're going to start with a background on each of us, and I'm going to,
Yeah, go for it.
I just jumped in so that I could introduce you.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give a sense of the work I was doing pre-residency, which was, so I'd say the work I did in residency with Craft Alliance was the most, was sort of the start of the work I was doing like as a independent artist working like a post-grad in St. Louis. So this is really mostly from undergrad, and then the sort of work that I did immediately after graduation in residencies and fellowships and stuff. So these are 5 paper silhouettes, and that's all hand cut text. So they're the silhouettes of my friends from college, and inside their bodies is this text I just cut with an X-Acto blade, and each text sort of references of my relationship to that person. So the example I usually give is my friend Scott, who is going to give a talk on this show later in the later during the show. He's in there, and the way we met was he recognized my key fob because we both drove Volkswagen Beetles. So the text in Scott's body is the manual for our shared car. So I was just starting to think about the sort of physical presence of text and of language, and sort of thinking about how craft and the act specifically of cut paper would be quite a present material in my work, started showing up then. So this is, I wanted to show you guys this piece, this is a screen print of my handwriting. It's a line from the eulogy I gave at my grandmother's funeral, repeated over and over again. And this was kind of the last meaningful thing I did with screen printing, because I was in a printmaking class. And that was, obviously, it's been a minute, but this concept of like printing handwriting came back with a lot of energy and force in this show. And specifically, you'll see some examples of Malaika's work that really, I think, interestingly reference this piece in ways that we didn't even really think about until afterward. This was sort of the last hurrah I did as an undergrad. I got the postbac fellowship for their studio art department. And I like to show this piece just because I think it's the first, I really was compelled to create a small space inside of the gallery. I really wanted to like shrink the space you were inhabiting. So that's a very roughly achieved cast of my body. And then this obviously like giant oversized skirts, and the idea was that the viewer could like go into that space, and the ground was covered with like pillows and fabric, and kind of be in this weird, warm, uncomfortable, strange space, which I think that idea of kind of a theater or like a space where performance or something happens started to kind of show up here. And then this is a book that I made when I was at Grin City Art Residency in 2015. And this was the first time I let myself really explicitly reference a third-party text. I'd really been working with personal narrative and sort of biographical sourcing previously, and this I reached out to. I had read Maroon in the Sea of Stories, which is a young adult novel by Salman Rushdie. I read it with a kid I was babysitting, and I was like, this is a story about stories, and this was very much in my wheelhouse. So I did this sort of, when it's all stretched out, it's about 8 feet long, and each of the little vignettes illustrates a point in the story. And what it let me do was create all these little baby theaters, right? All these things that sort of emerged from, or moved, or rotated, or kind of had this life, but still in paper. So yeah, and that was really a point of making that led me to the body of work that I made with Pratt Lawrence during residency. But we will come back to that in a minute. I hand it over to Malaika.
Oh, okay. So my background is not in fine art, so I wanted to give you an idea of how I came to where I am, and that actually starts in high school. So I was really interested in science and history and ceramics, which I started when I was in high school. I think that might be my first wheel-thrown pot. We're just gonna say that it is, because that's a better story. That currently resides at my mom's house. And that's my high school ceramics studio. And I was Yeah, just really interested in history. I took Latin. So that actually is, I found my copy of the Aeneid, which I translated my junior year of high school. So that was actually my introduction to the history of the Trojan War. The first time I ever traveled in Europe was with my Latin class, my junior year of high school, and we went to Rome, and that kind of just like shook me up and made me realize that I really wanted to explore in this way and explore architecture and art. And then when I went to college, I realized that art history was the best way for me to explore history in a visual way. I don't know why it didn't occur to me to study ceramics in college, but it just didn't. It was something I did, and I probably was a very bad Latin student because I was spending all of my free periods in the clay studio, and it just never clicked. So this slide is a representation of college for me, because in art history, you have to take some studio arts credits. So I took photography, and my final project was recreating a bunch of Italian Renaissance paintings at the Italian restaurant where I worked like 4 or 5 days a week throughout college. So this is a bunch of my buddies and roommates and friends from back there, and that was that's as much photography as I did. But I spent my college years working really hard and traveling. So I spent I don't know, really through most of my college years traveling as much as I could. And then the last place I traveled to in undergrad was doing field research on a tiny Greek island called Astyphalia. What had happened in undergrad for me is that I realized in art history that I was more interested in objects and archaeology and history of landscapes and urban design. And then I decided that I would go and get a second degree in anthropology because I really wanted to kind of merge that study of objects into a like more physical situation. I knew I wanted to do field school, but then when I started taking more anthropology courses, I realized what I really loved was bones. So then my field school, where I thought I would have been, I don't know, doing something architectural or with more art, I actually did a bioarchaeology field school in Greece, and this was the site of a neonatal cemetery. So what you see here is a bunch of amphora pots that infants were buried in. So it's a really large cemetery with over 800 burials. And I worked with a British archaeological team digging all of these individual burials, which was just fascinating and amazing. And through a turn of events after school, I ended up coming to St. Louis and not really knowing what I wanted to do with when I grew up, really. I started a master's program in geography at SIUE and then decided that's not really what I wanted to do at the time. Had kind of a quarter life crisis and ended up back in a clay studio, which happened to be Craft Alliance, where I've been for almost a decade. So when I was back in the clay studio at Craft Alliance, having just exited a master's program with my tail between my legs, I started working, doing a lot of map work in my ceramics. So I spent a lot of years kind of casually doing it, not really selling it that much, but just really scratching an itch, all those academic interests that I wanted to study that never really did in an academic way. And then that kind of culminated. Now I have a small business called Place Value Pottery, and I'm selling a production line, mostly functional stuff, and with small children, and teaching a little bit, selling a little bit, just kind of hustling. And I don't know what comes after this, but this is where I am now. And then I think we want to talk a little bit about the residency experience for both of us, where we met 3 years ago. So I'm going to hand it over to you so you can talk about the work you made.
Yeah, so Craft Alliance turned out to be a very important turning point for me creatively, just because I graduated from undergrad and I fully did not know how to be an artist without classes in a studio and a lot of hand-holding. And Craft Alliance gave me a lot of time to like sit and stare and think and sort of process what I wanted to be doing. And I had this liberal arts education, and I had all these sort of interdisciplinary interests that I wanted to intersect in my work. And I have a long-standing pseudo obsession with Hamlet. I really love the text. I've seen it as many times as I'm able over the years. And what I started doing in residency, it felt weird to be doing this in an art studio, but I just reread Hamlet, and I took pages and pages and pages of notes and hand wrote out quotes. And I just spent a lot of time with the text. And this was really the first time that I sort of acknowledged to myself that research is this really important component of my studio practice. And I think that's another thing that, like, when Malaika and I saw that in each other, we were really like, ooh, let's do something together, because we both have a long runway into making something. We have a lot of reading to do, a lot of talking, a lot of writing that predates like getting our hands into these materials. So you can kind of see, again, I'm still, ooh, sorry, Mike. Really compelled to make theater spaces, but just ones that fit on my desk. So this is a steamer chest from like 1910-ish. And I built like these little vignettes into each drawer. And I was really thinking about Ophelia and this beautiful, brilliant, strange character who is so absent textually from this incredibly long play, but who I think without much labor is like a very compelling, strong person. So Ophelia is my bae. I love her. And so I was sort of re-envisioning her story with these small edits, these small kind of interventions in Shakespeare's text as we know it, to kind of give her a new ending, right? So that was that. And then that really kicked off this whole like casework thing that was happening around Hamlet. So I started collecting antique cases and antique boxes and doing like drawing little characters and making small spaces and obviously the piece on the left really explicitly thinking about audience and observation and silent and all those things. So these ladies crack me up. They're so funny. What's great is that when you open the box, they come out like, what? They just like rise out of the box like little like. It's very amusing to me because they're all just very judgmental and they're like looking at you and anyway. So anyway, and then I'd say the Ophelia is definitely a project I want to return to because I have lots more work I want to do here, but kind of the last piece. And here I have, for the first and hopefully many times to come, have to acknowledge my collaborator and sister, Carly Lowe, who is crazy talented, hardworking, amazing craft person and artist. And so she built these swords. They're wood, they're beautiful. She built them, I painted them. And those are Carly's hands that I cast in wax and then like dipped in ink and graphite and painted and did all kinds of things you're probably not supposed to do to wax, but you know what, we're moving on. So, but I was thinking about this last soliloquy or not soliloquy, but speech that Ophelia gives before she drowns herself in the river, and she's handing all these flowers to members of the court, and each flower has this very specific symbolism that's sort of this stinging accusation of the lead characters in the play. We're not talking about Ophelia, so we're gonna move on, but anyway, that was sort of the last piece that I did for the Ophelia series.
Oh, okay, so this is me in residency. Yeah, 2018 was an exciting year for me because it was the first year that both of the kids were in full-time daycare preschool. So I really got to, I mean, having time and space that was my own to be able to work was amazing. And throughout that year, I really grappled with this this feeling of, oh, I'm not really a capital A artist. Like I'm a maker and I need to make functional work because I need to sell it. But I also did a lot of teaching that year in community programs and other parts of Craft Alliance that were really great too. And it was a busy, busy year. And in the studio practice, I did have some time and space to just get kind of weird. On the left, you can see that I really did want to do some work that had to do with Greece and my experience there, but I never really did because I was busy like making porcelain interstate exchanges with a piping bag, apparently. But I really got to play around with texture and style and imagery and transfer of images and finding new ways to get the things I was interested in a stylistic way onto clay. And then a lot of those I took with me afterwards to work on my my own art that I sell. And then in the show, I worked on all this weird stuff, but then the show, I kind of went back into my comfort zone, which was just making lots of vessels and lots of, this piece on the left is all hand engraved in porcelain. And they're just, it was called Mobile Uploads. And it was just a bunch of pictures that were randomly on my phone from the few years before I moved to St. Louis. And then shortly after I moved to St. Louis. And the piece on the right is just kind of like a typological array of certain urban street maps But you know, I just realized, Abby, I don't have a picture of it, but in our residency show, we both had dirt on the ground.
We did.
I did a mosaic on the floor and I had dirt. And then that kind of leads into this where we're like, Stephanie, can we bring 500 pounds of sand into the gallery? That would be awesome.
The footage I wish I had was like me trying to get that much sand out of Home Depot by myself. That was like full body weight, like 45 degree angle to the ground, pushing that cart.
If you haven't seen the show, we will try to do a little tour. There's a lot of sand on the floor. Okay, so then yeah, so after the residency, we kind of had a break, which meant different things for us. For me, it was the next year for me was less teaching and community work and more working on growing my business. And
then this was sort of the next time that Malaika and I really talked was at a Speed Craft event with Craft Alliance.
Oh yeah, true.
And you had found all of these strange old notebooks.
Yeah, Abby, during this event, she had talked and shown a lot of work that she used handwriting in and imagery, which you guys saw a little bit earlier. And so there was one January, I don't know, morning where I was like, Abby, let's go get breakfast. I had this flood in our house, and a lot of my old journals, travel journals, notebooks from college were like pretty much all destroyed. I had dried them in the sun, packed them away in a box, and I was like ready to crack them open. And I wanted Abby to be there because I was like, Abby, I love this. It's paper. It's weird. It's messy. You're gonna like it. And I had kind of like and I was like, this is, I don't know what this is, but I want to do something with it. And then we kind of started to talk about a way we could do a show together that incorporated personal history, narrative, memory, and we had a couple of proposals and ideas. We met with Stephanie. And that's how the show was born, because she was like, well, we need to do something that has like an archaeological element to it, because it's a way you can really dig into your stories and history and the physicality of the objects that we make. So then I happened to tell, and it's funny, you dive so much into research, you don't remember what you knew before, but I told Abby the story of Heinrich Schliemann, who was a German businessman, entrepreneur, got rich during the California gold rush and was able to fund his dream of unearthing the walls of Troy. He's a very problematic figure. He stole a lot of people's work and ideas. He's kind of a fraud, kind of a con man. He really did a lot. And for about 100 years, he was revered as the father of archaeology. But we just want to remind you that this is what we want to picture him as, is a 19th century villain and con artist. But eventually he made his way to Greece and Troy and funded his own archaeological research. So now I think we're jumping right into talking about what it was like to collaborate during the pandemic, because we decided on this show pretty much right before all of this hit, and then suddenly we didn't see each other for 6 months. And we were both working on this show in our own way. It involved lots of late night texts and a bunch of photos sent back and forth. If you have iPhones and you go to a message and you click info, you can see all the pictures that you sent to a specific person. Oh, wait.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just to give you an idea of what we were sending back and forth for a year. And this is a very small.
What this doesn't include is the like dozens of voice notes that would come from Malaika and then come from me, and just like musing on everything from like, I can't find bread at the grocery store to like, did you really think about how much time this guy spent on boats and like all this stuff.
And the other thing with that is just, I mean, I think about when we were in residency together and literally shared a wall, that there wasn't
we didn't talk like at all.
That much. I mean, we did, but it's just amazing the different kinds of conversations and how you prioritize, how you communicate with people during this whole crazy year is really interesting.
We were very siloed in residency, and then we found we had so much to talk about, which has been such a joy.
Yeah.
So I'm good. I wanted to, well, first of all, I needed a photo of Carly in here because Carly is like, as much as this work is mine and Malaika's, this work is Carly's. Like, she refers to herself as my technical director, which I appreciate because I get to dream big, weird dreams, and Carly gets to go, cool, this is how we do it. And she has a background in fine furniture making and theater design and construction. She can do and build anything. I am her hype woman. She's incredible. So these banners, I absolutely have to acknowledge Carly, because without her, they would not have happened. We so worked as a team to make these pieces together. And so, you know, you can, hopefully the folks who are here get to go kind of look at them in person, but I did just want to kind of use this as a point to talk about how, for me, I really wanted to use this show as an excuse to break out of my typical mode of making, which maybe you have a sense from the work that I showed previously, was very much about like singular objects and, you know, very like laborious, and everything, every surface was sort of like touched and addressed, and you know, pieces would take months and months to make. And then I had like a thing that was the size of a shoebox, which is not bad. But I really, because I have this interest in theater and performance, I was like, we gotta start working larger and faster than we've been working. So this was a space where like digital processes was my friend here, and started to kind of expand what I could make and how fast I could make it. So all of these prints in the Sophia banners, that's Sophia Schliemann pictured there. One is my drawing of her, and the other is a historical photo of her wearing some of the jewels from Priam's treasure. Those were all run on a press. Those are relief print images, but the plates were created digitally. So they were etched on a laser cutter. So I scanned my drawing, I made it into like a half-tone print, I etched it into wood, and then I was able to, produce all of these images, right? So there's I think there's 100 images of Sophia there all together, and some of them are 5-6 layers deep in terms of how they come together. So the matrix of like what colors printed when, at what size, on what piece of fabric was like, it's when I wish I had taken more math.
I know.
Sorry, Mark.
I'll tell you how much, like what percentage of art is actually math.
It's a lot of math. So anyway, but that was a lot of fun. So I just wanted to show my dog, just like Luna chilling in the background there. She's like, shout out to Luna, always helpful. So this was sort of you'll see boats as a motif a lot in the show. And what that really started with was Malaika like having this moment of like, oh my God, like Schliemann spent all this time on ships traveling between all of these different places to the States.
That's how he probably was able to teach himself 15 languages.
Yes.
That's a lot of time on boats.
So Malaika sent me a lot of very thoughtful voice notes about like how all of this suspended time for Schliemann like created kind of this space for him to do all of this writing and all of this language acquisition and all of this sort of self-mythologizing, which was its own like labor, right? Like digging out Troy was one thing, but how many journals did he leave that are each 300, 400 pages and written in like up to 12 different languages, right? So she sent me these 2 little drawings of boats, which you will see printed on the walls.
Yeah, I had a moment where I was just staying up too late, like researching 19th century, like nautical history. And I was like, Abby, I drew these boats. And then I think it was maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 days later, I get an image texted back that was like, that boat in paper. And it's like, how did you do that? I mean, the way Abby changes like 2 dimensions into 3 is just like baffling to me. It's amazing. So you're gonna see a lot of boats in the show. I also realized we don't have a lot of images from the show. So those of you who haven't been able to visit, hopefully you can in person soon. And if not, there will be a couple opportunities to kind of do a more in-depth tour of it. So a lot of this stuff will make more sense once you see the whole thing.
So this, I just wanted to show my hilarious first attempt where the sails are facing the wrong way. So that boat is like shooting backwards across the ocean. That was just kind of funny. And then just give a sense of like this was my desk for months, was just like piles of bits of boats. So all those components are, the flat pieces are laser cut after I screen printed sheets of Heinrich. So those are Schliemann's journals from when he was excavating Troy that are printed in gold onto the paper. And then they're constructed with a little bit of kind of like tabbing and gluing, but mostly they're stitched together at all those connection points.
Crazy.
Woo.
Wow.
Gotta have the sewing in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So there's the original journal page. I just got excited because you can see he wrote Odyssey, and I was like, cool.
Yeah.
Keep going. And then all of his journals are just digitized online, and they're beautiful and fascinating.
The American Institute of Archaeology in Athens. I forget what, but you can go on, you can look through all.
It's a good way to lose a day or two. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the heaviest lift in this show for me was the temple space in the center of the gallery. And so the basis of that space is 11 drawings of characters from the Iliad, and gods and heroes both alike. And the sort of central conceit of that space was I wanted to repeat that gesture that Schliemann did, which was, so Schliemann dressed his wife Sophia up as Helen of Troy, and that's that very famous photo of her in like Priam's treasure and all dressed up like Helen, and that sort of strange impulse to like put himself and the people he knew into this history, and as that kind of like as a gesture of ownership or familiarity was strange and empathetic to me. So I did the same thing. I recast all the Iliad characters as people, friends, family in my life. So I coerced mostly people into letting me take their photo. This is my very good friend, Abby Abrams. So took her photo, did a couple of prep drawings, and then started working through that image in India ink and a dip pen. That's how those are drawn. They're originally 11 inches by 22 inches. They wound up 4 feet by 8 feet. And I just want to show also that there's always an amalgam, right? Like I'm referencing a photo of her head, but I was like, I need a hand. And I was like, I have a hand, great. So that's sort of a compilation of where I'm pulling imagery from is always a little bit impulsive, which I kind of enjoy.
Are you going to talk about the next one?
Oh yeah. So this is just like, this is the setup, a big architecture desk in there. And I was so proud when I got all of them done. It's like
I know.
11 took longer than I thought. Anyway.
You know that I spent the whole time thinking there were 12?
Well,
So
because of the
who's
door.
going to be the last one?
Yeah,
the door. That's why I know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah, and I just wanted to talk briefly about where I was pulling imagery from other than the faces of my loved ones. So I spent a good bit of time just really digging into red and black figure, etched imagery of these characters and trying to figure out kind of like if these characters were frequently represented, how were they represented? How were they sort of recognizable or not? And so I just wanted to kind of identify some of the patterns that I pulled. So these are both very famous examples of Greek ceramics. This is Ajax, on the bottom is Ajax and Achilles playing some kind of tabletop game, and on the top is Achilles binding Patroclus's wound. And so I just wanted to kind of illustrate that you can kind of see where I pulled the pattern that wound up on Achilles' shield, but then also obviously the bond between Achilles and Patroclus is a central narrative force in the Iliad, and I wanted to kind of tie those two characters together visually. And this is called the Mask of Agamemnon. This is a artifact that Schliemann discovered. This is one of his more famous discoveries. Very not clear that it has anything to do with Agamemnon, is from the right era, was even found at the site he claims it was found at.
Do you want me to give like a
Please, yeah, go for
20-second
it. Go for
anecdote
it.
that
Yeah.
I just learned the other day?
I love
was
that.
what happened is he dug this death mask, and said, apparently to himself, I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon, which he sent in like a telegraph to like maybe the I don't know, an ambassador who was in Athens, right? And then later, but it wasn't actually this mask, it was a different one.
God.
And then later he found this one, which was like much nicer.
Freaking
so this
classic.
is the one.
Yeah, it's like this is
classic
bigger
Schliemann.
and bolder.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah. So that's my dad as Agamemnon, and I loved that. Yeah, I mean, I wanted that mask that Schliemann was so proud of discovering.
I would like also to point out that Abby's illustrations are just so intricate and detailed, and there's so much like woven into them that, I mean, we've worked on this for a year. I've seen these patterns, I've used these patterns in my own work. And when you were talking about it today, it's like, oh my gosh, that's the eyes.
That's the eyes.
And I never noticed that's how
I feel about your
are.
work. Like, it's just, you're always thinking about 10 things. Yeah. So I just wanted, if it wasn't something that, again, you know, when you're in the weeds a little bit, you lose track of what's obvious and what's not. But I did do Aphrodite's hair in reference to the birth of Venus. Obviously the Roman version of, but anyway, I just like, Abby really does have hair that fabulous. So I was like, she deserves the full like Botticelli.
And that hair is the gift that keeps on giving, which you'll see later.
Yes, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So that's just another example, trying to kind of pull in some symbolism from. It was definitely easier with the gods, because the 4 gods that are in the temple have more sort of allegorical like imagery associated with them, much more so than like an Odysseus or a Hector, who are more identified by their narratives than they are by their adornments. So I did some, you know, hand waving, like, oh, okay. But, okay, so this is Athena. Athena is always easy to spot because she's got her helmet tipped back and she's got that dope like snake cloak thing. I just wanted to just because I feel like it's a fun fact that you wouldn't know from just going through the show of like, so Athena beheads Medusa, and so the Medusa head is called the Gorgon. It's that like grotesque face with the snakes. So this is I studied Baroque art in college, and this in the top right is an image of Caravaggio's painting of the Medusa head, and he very famously based it on a self-portrait. So I actually based my Medusa head on a self-portrait. So I like took a hilarious selfie of myself, like. And I almost included it, but it's like very not attractive.
I didn't know about that either.
There you go.
We had so much to talk
Joyful,
about. We could possibly
joyful.
talk about everything.
But anyway, that's me screaming in the corner if anyone was interested. So these guys got these images where I scanned them at very, very high resolution, broke them up into 12 tiles, digitized them, vectored, cut them out on a laser cutter, pulled them out of the laser cutter with transfer tape, and then weeded them. So pulled out all the negative stuff, which you can see on the left, and then recompiled them back in the correct order, and spray glued them to paper. So that whole space is created with shadows. I did a lot of like shadow puppetry kind of stuff earlier in school, and I've always loved, I love that aesthetic of, you know, paper and cast shadow. So there you go. Oh yeah, and Carly built me a tiny baby temple with tiny baby shelves and tiny baby lighting, so that if I think I have the photo, yeah, there's Doug with their heads like stuck in the tiny gallery to try to kind of like feel like what it would be like in that space. And then this was their first attempt at Athena on the right. Bless Carly's heart, like did that whole thing with me, and I had like taped it together, and we tried to like glue the whole thing and flip it at once, and the nose like blew up, and she's not centered, and it was a mess. But you know, all about troubleshooting, problem solving, trying again. There we go.
Okay. So a lot of Abby's imagery in the show just came from your brain and your hands, which is not something that I do. I'm not an illustrator. I got a lot of imagery that I used in my pieces, and we used them in yours, and we did back and forth. But one thing was that Schliemann had this guidebook. I think the Greek one was published in 1854. He had that with him. It turns out like a lot of the things that he did around Greece, his little adventures, were actually just plucked from the guidebook. So either he made the stories up later through that plagiarizing, or he actually did it and just like followed exactly what the guidebook said, which, I mean, haven't we all done that? Lonely Planet. Anyway, so some of the other imagery you'll see a lot are these plates that were engraved, and these are just various scenes from the digs that he's done. So you'll see those a lot at different points in the show. And of course, his journals and diaries. And he had, like I said, he spoke 15 languages. He taught them to himself, and was able to write fluently in a few of them at least. So his diaries will switch from, you know, Greek to Arabic to French to German, and it's really interesting. So we have a lot of his text in there too. So we're going to talk about like where we pulled different imagery that you're going to see in the show into different mediums. So this is one of our favorite little etchings of people looking at the stuff that he found and absconded with from various sites. And you'll see that repeated a lot because it's just wonderful. So bottom left is something that I made with clay. We did a lot of screen printing, both in clay and with fiber. So that was really fun. And then some other imagery that I made comes from various experiences of mine. So I talked a little bit about that archaeological dig. We did all of our excavations on tabletops in this little abandoned school building on this island. So at some point, like I made this map, like a floor plan of this building and the various uses for rooms. And then later on, or this, past year, I digitized them. I did a lot of things, kind of flipping around the images, making some patterns. So that's one that you'll see a lot in the show. And then this one too, which is my favorite. So I kind of got into this like sort of abstract kaleidoscoping of little bits and pieces of things. So this is one that's also from the school floor plan, and you'll see that a lot as well. It's like a lovely diamond situation. And then maps, because I use maps a lot in my work, and I was really proud that there were no maps in the show except for these hidden patterns, because and we talked about that, I really could have done a lot, but I didn't want to do that. So this is sort of a process of drawing and digitizing a map. This is part of Athens, where down at the bottom left you have the Acropolis, and then upper right where you see those grids are a huge building on was now is the numismatic, the coin museum of Athens, but that was a a mansion shaped like a temple that Schliemann built himself. So his house is on that map, and then I abstracted it, I repeated it, I made some interesting patterns, and you'll see that a lot throughout the show as well. And then back to Abby's illustrations, I was able to use bits and pieces of all the beautiful patterns that she made and use various methods to get them onto clay. So for example, Aphrodite's hair, which is just beautiful and it looks like waves. So I experimented a lot with those. And I remember when I was working with this, like I think I made a stencil for this one, at least for the image on the right, that pot that I had just glazed. And I'm like sitting there peeling all these pieces of hair out. This is before I really understood what her portraits, how they were made. I'm like, Abby, this is too detailed. The weeding is such a pain in the butt. And she's like, yeah, I know.
I'm aware.
She was working on like 8-foot versions of these. And then this bottom one is screen printed onto earthenware, I think. And then so I just like took one of your slides and made it for, so this is Achilles' shield, right?
Yeah.
So I use that. This is an example of the that's just on contact paper, a stencil that I made to use then on porcelain. So anyway, in doing this show, so Abby's like big moment in the show is the temple, and for mine it was the archaeological museum. So I really I studied a lot, and I've always been interested in that. I've been interested in like low budget museums, like the biggest museums in the world, and how they treat and display artifacts. On the left is just this a little tiny museum in London that's kind of underground, and just like a collection of things. But I really liked how all the little things are laid out. Maybe you don't have a grand collection of like 500 of the same kind of object, but you do with it what you can. And then the right is the house that Schliemann grew up in Germany, and it's converted into a museum, and it's a little more low budget, but I think
This is
it's
the
really
one that
cute.
has like the Trojan horse outside, but it's like a slide.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Every museum that's made that has to do with Troy has to have that, because actually last year they opened up a Troy museum at the site, state of the art and just gorgeous and amazing architecture, and they still have a Trojan horse.
Oh,
So
for
I'm like,
goodness sake.
that's just cheapens it. That's okay. So anyway, in the part of the show that is the museum, I tried to replicate different ways that you might see pieces that sort of display hints of their function. So I made a whole bunch of loom weights, and I have to say, like, just making everything for the show is so much fun. So I got to get out of production mode, doing the stuff that now kind of bores me, mugs and plates and bowls and whatever. I'm like, yes, recreating Bronze Age artifacts is what I wish I could make a living off of. So if anyone needs loom weights, this is for what was called like a warp weighted loom. So instead of attaching all those strings at the bottom, they just had heavy stones or ceramic objects holding those down. And then so the metal, we talked a little about the treasure of Priam, right? It was this this collection of precious metal artifacts that he supposedly dug up from one site conveniently, but really we think that they spanned a whole bunch of different decades. They didn't belong to Priam's kingdom, you know, they came from a lot of different places, but he was really into it. The gold is beautiful, the objects are intricate. They're now in Moscow because they ended up in Germany, and then they were taken from Germany during World War II, and Russia does not want to give them back to Germany because it's kind of a consolation for all the damage that they did in Russian cities during World War II. And not that anyone's talking about giving them back to Turkey, but that's a whole different story we'll talk about later. So because I'm not a metalsmith, I had to make a lot of recreations of metal objects with clay, which was really fun. I mean, I don't get to do stuff like that very often. It was so exciting because glazing things gold and silver and doing all sorts of fun stuff with very toxic materials, the payout is just totally worth it. It was really fun unloading the kiln where I normally have planters and whatever, and being like, there's treasure in here. It's so exciting.
It's also
I broke a lot of it too, by the way, because when you drop a metal object on the floor, it bounces and maybe dents, but when you drop ceramic objects on the floor, it's not what happens. Anyway, lots of loom weights. The ones on the right side are mine, or not loom weights, sorry, these are spindle whorls. So again, these objects of like everyday use that Schliemann was really frustrated finding so many of. On the left are illustrations of ones that he had found, and these are just like the notable ones that have interesting imagery. For every one of those, there's probably like 50 that were just hunks of clay, right? So he wanted the treasure, he wanted the shiny things, but I really love the idea of displaying all these, like, you know, kind of a typological thing. Okay, and then these cups, the left two are just images from museums, but this translates as the type of cup is just a double cup, right? Schliemann thought that, and this appears a lot in the Homeric epics, and trying to figure out like what artifact that particular phrase meant. And so at first they thought maybe a double drinking vessel that had like 2 cups attached together. Schliemann decided it was the translation could like a double handled vessel, but you find these around the Aegean because there's a lot of trade. But I just thought it was just a really fun object to make a whole bunch of. So you'll see them in a lot of different places in our show. So the top ones are mine, and we have like flat ones that are printed and some hanging up. More metal things. And then on the right, just scraps and fragments of pattern pieces. And then really in the end of this, we just have so many shattered things, because what was really fun too is being able to make objects for the sake of breaking them, which was just a ceramic artist's dream, because we're so fixated on these objects that are precious and finished and whole. So it was absolutely thrilling to be able to make stuff just to know that I was going to smash them up into tiny bits. So I got really into doing this whole process. I got really interested in like following woodlarkers and people who just find tiny treasures. That's kind of a genetic thing in my family. We are collectors of small, strange objects. I owe a lot of that to my grandfather. My mom's like that. My uncles. So shout out to them because they're watching right now. And happy 88th birthday to my grandmother, Bam.
Happy birthday.
And without her support, my grandfather's support, like so many of my endeavors would not have been possible. So thank you. Anyway, so these are actually on the right, just to plug another St. Louis artist, Kristen Caspy, who's a mudlarker and finds amazing stuff and just all sorts of crazy prints and things with them. So look her up, she's awesome. Oh, and that's the one where I was like, am I gonna add another image to the slide? I don't know, but anyway, this is great. So anyway, at home I have boxes and boxes now with a whole bunch of little ceramic fragments that were not found, but that were made by us, which is just so much fun. I think this is coming to the end of the slide presentation. So Abby, I threatened that I was going to do all sorts of crazy animation in the slide. She's like, please don't, please don't. But I had to, because I wanted to end on a note. We've kind of touched on this, but barely. Just want to plug this into your brains before you go. This idea of repatriation of objects from these areas of the world, and all areas of the world, especially the global south, that are in museums all over the world, right? So the idea of who gets to display them, who gets to see them, why they're in the places that they are. Every object has this history, and a lot of it is some, pretty shady dealings, like someone like Schliemann. But for every Schliemann, there were a million people who were doing it a little less obviously. So it's an interesting thing to think about that is still like in the news all the time. Sorry about the animation. I did this just to drive Abby crazy, but just to hammer the point home. It's just fascinating stuff. And that's just like, really, we're just scratching the surface on what that's all about. I think that's the end.
I believe that.
Yeah. So what page should we go back to?
Well, I'm actually
I'm
gonna jump in here.
Okay.
There is a question in chat.
And we can go to other,
Yeah,
don't do that.
Do you want to just look at our faces?
Well, they've been looking at your faces. I forgot to tell you. You've been great. You've been phenomenal.
Wait, really? What?
Okay, for both Abby and Malaika, how did you decide to balance between the abstracted, fragmented, obscured, unrecognizable imagery, text pattern, with the very specific, clear references you're making in historical imagery?
I'm sorry, can
Yeah, can you
say
read
that again? That was too good.
That was
question.
really
That was
good,
a
right?
Good question.
That's my question.
We'll write
is
a
our
paper
current
on
artist
some
in resident.
Yeah, okay. Who's this from? Can we ask that?
Sarah, and
Oh,
you will be able to see her
okay.
in their show with Doug after.
Oh, so
Okay.
nice. Thanks.
Little plug. We have a really strong community here. How did you decide on balance between the abstracted and the fragmented, the obscured and the unrecognizable imagery, along with text and pattern, which are very specific, and clear references? Like, how did you decide to historically pick abstract and clear references? Is what I'm
Interesting. Sarah, that's a good question.
Can I get
Okay.
them back to this?
Shout out to Sarah and Doug for both helping with
I'm
Insta.
gonna
Yeah,
say,
absolutely.
because Sarah is a ceramic person. So the idea of fragmented versus whole pieces, right? I think in archaeology today, we pay a lot more attention to these small scraps and things that can tell us so much, and so much more now we can learn from them than we were learning from huge, museum-worthy vessels that we're finding. And I don't want to say they're picked over, because I'm sure there's constantly new sites that we're digging up, but really you learn so much more from a scrap of pottery, which I'll talk more about in my my talk on May 22nd. So I don't know. So in museums, depending on, once again, the budget, I mean, you're not going to see like just a whole room of scraps at the Met. You'll see the big pieces, but at a lot of museums, there is an emphasis on all these like scraps and hot shirts and stuff that might be interesting. But if you don't have a lot of big pieces, then. So I tried to make, actually this is not answering the question at all, but I tried to make a mix of like whole objects that are whole but are smashed and put back together, and then fragments, because there's just a lot of them in the world. I was like a 10th of the question.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the text, I worked with far fewer like texts than Malaika did.
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, you
mean the physical like pattern?
You were,
like,
in terms of the screen printing, you had like
Yes,
30
that's
screens that you were dealing with, and I was like dealing with that one page.
I meant like the literature, because you were definitely.
Oh, the literature. I mean,
reading
but
more than I was.
physically, like printing, I had fewer images to work with. So, I think Malaika makes an interesting point about, especially in ceramics, like the effort to be whole, and you know, have something that is perfect and unblemished is quite difficult and results in failure a lot, right? So there's a lot of, the show was an interesting opportunity to include failure, right? So you can see in the little like fake dig site with the sand, like I had made a second of those Gorgon cups that you see in the Cabinet of Curiosity section, and then I dropped like a giant roll of paper on it and broke it in half. So and what was in a different context, that would be something like in the garbage, I like half buried it in sand, and I was like, go be free, like go be seen by people. So I think there was a lot of space for us to sort of, in a way, like show process and show failure and show sort of experimentation in the show, and not have that just something that happened behind the scenes.
So as a curator, I'm going to answer that question.
Great.
Okay, good.
Because I think what she's trying to ask you is there is a lot to pull from with imagery versus text, right? So for me, I would encourage viewers to see the pattern and the rhythms that are throughout the show. If it's Sophia, and that Sophia shows up everywhere, the boats sort of show up everywhere. And I think you really curated the text based on those few narratives you pulled out of Schliemann's arsenal of crap, right? Like you wanted to focus on Sophia and how and what and you wanted to focus on the ships and his obsession with Iliad. That's the other thing they're not saying, is you can see the word Iliad and Homer throughout Schliemann's text. So there's little patterns like that, and I would answer Sarah by saying I think they picked out rhythms that they're not conscious.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for each of you.
Yeah.
Now that I'm going to snowball you a question, what advice would you give each of you to move forward with or push in the other person's work?
Ooh.
Because that's the real, I mean, you guys are really lucky to have this relationship post-graduate school, right? Or you have somebody to bounce things off of. And now that you're not really done with this work, I understand that. But
realize when you're doing the slide presentation, we're barely scratching the surface of all the things we're interested in.
But what would you encourage each of you to go back to your studio and
You mean like
push?
literally like go back and make?
I encourage Malaika to really dive into this aspect of their work that she barely touched, or she was onto something there, and I encourage Abby to go and blah blah blah.
That's basically
And
what I was
go.
gonna say, was that I know that there are a million like little things that you, and we talked about, you showed your work where you're working on a very tiny scale and stuff, and I know that was something that you really wanted to incorporate into the show too, but you were busy doing literally larger than life things.
Yes.
So I think that like if we go back to the studio tomorrow, you start taking all of this and put it into the little things. Like I want to see what those are. Yes. And I also want to see you doing more play things, which will make you do.
Yes.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for Malaika, like I mean, you can do anything, but you have such an interest in image transfer and how to get marks that you don't even I mean, like I said 30 times, I'm like, I don't draw, I'm not a drawer. I think first of all, I think your drawings are beautiful and I love them. But if you consider that like an obstacle you're working around, I think you have so many interesting ways of getting image onto clay. And every time you come up with a new one, it's like a little fireworks show. So, and especially how you can use that to continue kind of replicating or referencing these historical like modes of artifacts, I think could be fascinating. So like, how do I get contemporary clay Malaika to like look like this 8th century, like, like how do I get that to happen?
Okay, all right. I'm gonna ask, any of you have a question? Oh, it's
Yes,
the secret
Carly.
weapon, Carly. I really say it's your secret weapon.
It is my secret one.
So we heard a little bit about Abby's experience with Joe, her secret self-portrait. And I know one or two of Malaika's Easter eggs. I wonder if you explain either the motives or other things that you snuck in there.
Oh, sure. You know,
The email on your on top of your grandpa's drawers.
And
About getting your
the
cards.
email-
oh, okay, yeah, I guess we didn't really talk about that, but we screen printed a lot of, you know, imagery and text from Schlieman's diaries, from those guidebooks, you'll see a lot in. But I also did include a lot of imagery and wording and text from my own journals from traveling. So I have, oh, and then, yeah, digital archaeology. I screen printed old emails from during travel days onto scraps of clay. Like you'll see if you look closely at some things, you'll see a little Gmail, like little star from the inbox and everything, which was really fun for me to throw those Easter eggs in for myself. And then I think actually really, I can't believe we didn't put a picture in the slideshow, but so in that beautiful space that Abby created as the temple, these 8-foot portraits, in front of each portrait is a little votive that I made. It's just like matte black on the outside. You can't really see it except for the inside. They're lit by a little tea light. And on the inside of each vessel, I did some imagery that, I mean, obviously Abby has these associations that are very personal with each person, but I took my association with whatever character, god or mortal, from the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so there's some deep meanings with some of the imagery, and some of them are just kind of inside jokes I made with myself. But that's kind of fun. Like for Odysseus, for example, we have a votive, and the inside of it is from one of those 19th century guidebooks, a guide to the islands of the Aegean Sea. So that's for Odysseus, who obviously had some issues with
The
traveling
islands of the
around.
Aegean Sea,
Yeah, so things like that, which, I mean, that's the funny thing about, I mean, yeah, there's just all sorts of little things. Every single object in the show, like you could pick up and I could talk to for an hour about, you know, we don't have time.
You just have to ask us to
Same
stop.
with
Really,
Abby,
yeah.
right? Mhm.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So I think that as a society right now, we're really grappling with understanding an artist as a person, or a person as an artist, and how we kind of navigate maybe the more problematic parts of the person. Since who they see. And I wonder how you think about that.
That is such a
So
good
I'm gonna ask you
question.
guys to
Oh,
repeat the
I did
question and
exact
your
same.
answer. Perfect, because not
Sure.
everybody can hear on Zoom. So I
Sure, so
appreciate
you were asking about, and now I'm gonna just butcher your question, but basically, how we grapple with like artist identities and problematic identities, and how, you know, Schliemann is kind of an interesting example of someone with a very, you know, complicated self.
But how do we reckon with who the person was versus what they
Right.
made, and how we
Sure.
kind of value both of those things?
And so,
Okay.
but so an interesting thing about researching Schliemann and his obsession with rewriting his personal narrative, I should say that when he wrote his book, published his book on his findings at Troy, his intro talked about how ever since he was a little boy and he read the Iliad, or his father read it to him, he decided that he was going to find the walls of Troy. But nowhere in his actual writing do you see any reference to any of this until he happened to meet a guy who was like on a dig and was, you know, talking to people who were doing that. So this idea of like rewriting personal history, I think, is something we all kind of do. We have like fictionalized, whether purposeful or accidental, memories and, you know, intertwined into our own life story. So I think like halfway through the show, we're kind of like, especially for me, because I'm rereading emails and journals, like emails that are writing something about an experience in a journal versus writing an email to my best friend about it versus writing to my grandmother about it or whatever. They're going to be really different stories that are all have elements of truth in them. So I think looking at a character like Schliemann, I mean, he was very problematic, but also he's part of a society where he could get away with a lot of that. But seeing some of those weird personal attributes in yourself and kind of helps to empathize with him, even though he's super problematic, and see problematic things that we all have.
Yeah, I would add on to that we were given a lot of space to operate here because we are really reaching pretty far back, and contemporary academics have already done a ton of work, right? Like this is not our hot take on Schliemann. Like Schliemann is understood to be this like strange problematic thief who was acknowledged in this academic setting for a long time, but it's really sort of like if you encountered if you encountered him in a history textbook, he would no longer be held up in this way, right?
Well,
He would,
actually, I would say that there's still a little bit of dialogue going on about that still in contemporary like writing. It's
sure,
not-
only to say
yeah.
that we kind of came to this subject with an understanding that he had tarnished history. And so what that kind of gave us the space to do is, I mean, we both have academic backgrounds, but as artists, we were able to kind of investigate this subject, I think, with a little bit more joy and empathy and playfulness than I anticipated at the beginning, right? There was this, there was a lot of joy in taking on all that hubris and like confidence and privilege that Schliemann had in creating this history, this sort of first imagining, this first Western imagining of Homeric Troy, right? And now we, like two young women artists, like get to like take on that mantle of this like outrageous bravado and retell his story, right? And make mistakes and take things out and rearrange things and put ourselves in all these places. So I think that's kind of how I do. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna do a project, I sometimes think, is serious about how long it's gonna take, you know, don't kid yourself, and then multiply by 3 and add a few and other quotes. So I'm curious about your labor of love and time. What did you think about the amount of time you put in, how much you thought it would take, and how much you actually ended up getting?
Oh, I'm just gonna hide.
So I'm
under the
just gonna,
table
well,
from Stephanie right
I'm gonna repeat this question because we're getting some
Oh, sure.
on Zoom.
Okay.
So the gentleman asked, with a lot of compassion and empathy, that he understands that you think something's gonna take a certain amount of time and
Yeah.
it takes a lot longer. And he was asking how you manage that time, and yeah, they should be scared.
I know. Yeah, I mean, this was, like I said, we scratched the surface going through like notebooks that I had at the beginning of the show, like the 10 million things I wanted to make. Not everything is something you can do. And also, I'm sure, I mean, I know that at the end, we're like, well, there were some things that we wanted to do that didn't get done, you know, and it's disappointing to us, but I mean, you just have to adjust expectations constantly throughout this process. I don't know what to say about it because I'm a procrastinator. I never get everything done I want to, and I kind of pull things out of the last minute, and just kind of I've reckoned with myself with that. Because it's the same in college with papers and stuff like that. At the end, you just do, you have what you have, and that's got to be good enough. But no, it's like it's my Achilles heel.
Well, I mean, I
Yeah.
just want to say in you guys' defenses, and I want to hear Abby's response. That you guys took on a transformation of space, and actually hearing from your residency how you work so individually and within these small environments to take on. And our gallery is twice as big as our old space. So if you haven't been to our new location, it's beautiful. So it really was a Herculean, just to throw in a little Roman Greek feat that you did. That I think if you were to do this again, you'd have a little bit more knowledge and understanding under your belt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing about like being part of the Craft Alliance family and having the trust of Stephanie and other people who have supported us to undertake something that we have not done before. Because that's risky. And it's a weird show, you know, there's a lot going on. And yeah, sorry, you were gonna.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the pandemic was a very active player in this. So there were things that we talked about at the beginning, wanting to happen. You know, when I started making paper boats, like immediately you're thinking of, you know, Helen of Troy in the face that wants 1,000 ships. So I was like, Carly, I'm gonna make 1,000. And she's like, you are not. That's not gonna happen. So, you know, okay, I think this is a very, I need to, again, like shout out Carly here, and Doug, my friend and current artist in residence, who you need ballast, right, for your dreams. You say 1,000, they say start with 100. Let's see how it goes. So I think I'm going to echo Malaika's concept of like editing actively as you're working about what you're going to get done and what you're not. And then, but also I lost my job last year, you know, and I went from, you know, most of my hours of my week doing like digital marketing to
Yeah, and likewise, I went from having a lot of free time to work on my work, the work I sell, grow the business, and then suddenly I had 2 small children at home for the majority of the year.
Yeah, so I think honestly, like COVID stuff impacted us very differently. And honestly, what I started doing was like, my full-time job is this. I'm going to go to the studio 40 hours a week and I'm going to make paper boats. So it was a strange, I'm not actually in a point of my career where I get to do that like in a way that makes sense, but for a year, because of the strange, like terrible circumstances, that's what I did. So I can imagine what this show would be if I was still like working my traditional job, but it wouldn't be this for sure.
Right,
So.
and if I had, who knows, what, but also, I mean, that was the thing is I think in the beginning, we imagined it as, an even more theatrical space. The idea of doing a show that's going to be viewed virtually a lot, where if we're going to have people in here for our opening, it was, maybe a cluster of 5 or 6 at a time through staggered, slots. It's very different than what a show, an art show would be normally. So we had to kind of rethink that as well.
And then also, this is just out of pocket with the materials.
Right, that's another thing I was going to mention is that in the beginning of all this, I mean, I think when I look back at those emails, I think we applied for a grant in the Regional Arts Commission. I mean, like a couple days before everything went down. So those organizations that would normally be supporting artists to make work like this kind of thing, we're going to artists to allow them to live and eat food and live.
So it went from like, we have this amazing idea to like, I need to pay my rent, and that was a very
So can I plug that everything's for sale, even the boats?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to transition to Scott's question.
Oh.
And
it's going to be a hard one.
well, there's only one word I'm going to stumble on,
Okay.
but because it's Scott. How has your opinion of Schliemann or antiquarians? Thank you.
Yeah.
In general, changed over the course of this project?
Oh, Scott. Love you, man.
I'll answer first because it's easy. They haven't. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I, studied in college, and I don't think that much has changed. Don't read as much, but I mean, like I said, it was kind of weird studying him because I remember just spewing this idea of this guy out to you after we had met with Stephanie to pitch a couple of proposals for the show. I was like, there's this dude who did this and whatever, and you were like, and so. No, I don't know. For me, it hasn't changed.
Okay, yeah. So I have a slightly, Malaika has a really good answer. I have a kind of bad one, which is like, I have much more empathy for Schliemann than I thought I was at the beginning of this, just because he is like truly a terrible, like two-timing, self-dealing, horrible person. And a war profiteer also. But so this was, coming out of a liberal arts background, like I love so many things. I love literature, I love history, I love art history, I love creative art, all these things, right? And I spend a lot of time wondering, like, why am I an artist? Like, why did I do this thing? Like, why do I feel compelled to keep doing these things that, when you're on your 99th boat, you're kind of like, oh my God, I'm here.
It's still more fun than re-editing papers.
I mean, you're not wrong. There is that for sure. But also what I was noticing about like the work I was starting to do towards the end of my undergraduate experience was like, I was writing art history papers about like Chagall, and I could make an academic argument, but what I was really doing was just like falling in love. I was just like I'm like, oh, like this, I wrote this paper about the work that Chagall did after his wife died, and I was just like in a whole empathy hole. I was like, all of these gestures he did of like mourning and of grieving through his work, I couldn't pull back far enough to say something smart. I was just very like, and so I think that's why I speak best through my hands more than I do in these other disciplines. So, not that we don't culturally need to be like very aware of the very problematic history we're examining here, but I think for me, my work is better when I see Schliemann as a person and not as a caricature. So all of these things that he did to sort of make himself the hero in his own story, whether it was, I said this during our little promo, but he ripped out pages of his journals when he had written something that he later wanted to go back and be like, oh, that didn't happen, like so-and-so was here and not there, like all of this very conscious narrative making. Like when I was a kid, I used to glue the pages of my sketchbook together when I didn't like my drawings. So I think I just like, if I were to answer that question, Scott, I would say that like my opinion of him is like slightly improved. So like the opposite.
Well, no, but actually I have a different answer now. I just realized because I'm not as interested in the people I realized,
Oh.
like, my love is the objects and the things that people make and the way that they fit into the historical and now like scientific realm of study. And the stories of people are amazing, and that's how we know about things. That's how we have things all over the place. That's, you know, people.
That's interesting.
People doing
Literally
stuff,
not
so I don't know. Yeah.
And one thing curatorially, because I'm always going to jump in and interpret the work,
Thank
because
you.
that's what I get to do without any hard labor. And I would say what intrigued me about this story, not only because his work tied literature directly to digging, is that it was really interesting to see two women interpret this male-dominated field for hundreds of years until recently. You know, get that interpretation not only through your lens, but through your artist sensibilities.
Yeah, I agree.
I just want to throw in the fact that archaeology now is turning into a female dominated field.
Hey.